It was just another Monday morning at the office, the kind of day you don't think twice about. But as soon as I swiped my badge, something felt off. The reader blinked a few times, then buzzed like it was thinking, and then gave me a hard, flat no. I figured it was some glitch. Happens all the time, right? But after a few more failed swipes, a cold weight settled in my stomach. This wasn't a glitch. This was deliberate. I glanced around, then tried again. Error. It's not like I didn't know my clearance wasn't expiring anytime soon. In fact, I'd just gone through the system last week. My access should have been golden, but the buzzes kept coming, one after another, and with each one, the uneasy feeling in my gut grew. My mind flashed back to a few days ago, that meeting with Derek, the new middle manager who'd been storming through the company, making changes left and right. Fast-talking, corporate suit, always trying to sell the idea that he understood what was going on, even though we both knew he didn't have a clue. He'd made it clear he wanted things streamlined. I had a feeling that streamlining meant pushing people like me out. Finally, after a painful pause, the reader let me in, fallback access kicking in. I barely registered it as I pushed through the door, still rattled. Something was wrong. This wasn't normal. I'd been with this company for over 20 years. The systems I built had never failed like this. I sat at my desk, trying to shake off the feeling, but then I saw it. On my computer screen, an unfamiliar terminal window. Someone had been in my system. I pulled up the logs. Someone had tried to pull down sensitive files. Failed, but that didn't matter. They'd been here. Someone, probably Derek or one of his people, had made an attempt. I didn't react right away. I had to think. This was serious, but I knew how to handle it. I pulled out my emergency USB drive, disguised as a plain lip balm tube, and started backing up the logs. Evidence. I wasn't going to alert anyone yet. Whoever was after me didn't know what they were messing with. I finished the backup and leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all sinking in. This wasn't just a technical issue anymore. Whoever was behind this wanted something bigger. And I had a feeling I was going to find out exactly what that was soon enough. I sat down in the conference room, the thin buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead making my skin crawl. Derek was already there, his posture too stiff, like he was trying a little too hard to look important. He was wearing that damn sweater vest again, a cheesy attempt to seem approachable, but it just made him look like a kid playing dress-up in his dad's closet. He glanced at me with that cocky little smile, as if he'd already won. Janice, the HR director, sat across from me. She looked uncomfortable, her fingers drumming on the table like she was trying to avoid eye contact. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She knew something was off too. I didn't need to ask what this meeting was about. I already had a feeling, but Derek's next words confirmed it. "Mark, your clearance has expired. You'll need to turn in your badge and token." Corporate clearance, I realized, not the legacy access tied to the government systems I'd built. "You've got to be kidding. My clearance is good until 2027. I would have been notified if it was expired." Derek didn't miss a beat. He handed me a piece of paper, the fake letter that said my clearance was revoked due to an administrative lapse. I took it, scanning the words, but I didn't need to read it. I could see the cheap ink, the cheap paper. The whole thing screamed fraud from a mile away. I didn't flinch, not once. I just stared at the paper, feeling a hot coil of anger twist in my gut. Inside, I was boiling. I had spent over 2 decades building this company's systems. I had given everything to it. And now Derek wanted to erase me with a piece of paper that wouldn't have passed a grade school spelling test. I slid the letter back across the table, slow and deliberate, like I was handling something that might break if I wasn't careful. "This is a joke. My clearance is valid. I would have been notified long before now if it was revoked." Derek waved it off, like I was the one who didn't get it. "You're not seeing the bigger picture here, Mark. It's an administrative issue. We're just trying to make sure everything's aligned. You've become a liability to the company, you know? A liability." He said it like he was talking about a broken chair, not a guy who had single-handedly kept this place running for over 20 years. I could feel my jaw tightening, but I kept my voice calm. "I'm not a liability, Derek. I've been nothing but a resource to this company. If you've got a problem with that, it's yours, not mine." Janice shifted in her seat, the tension in the room thickening. She cleared her throat and jumped in, like she was trying to put out a fire she wasn't sure how to handle. "Mark, We're offering a voluntary severance package. It's really a good deal, you know. We want this to be amicable. A severance package. A bribe, really. I could see it for what it was. They thought they could buy me off with a few months' pay. But it was clear. They didn't want me around anymore. They needed someone who would just shut up, sit down, and follow orders. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. I shook my head. I'm not interested. Derek's patience was starting to wear thin. It's not up for debate, Mark. I'm taking your badge and your token. He reached for them like it was some sort of victory. But I didn't move. I sat there, staring him down, letting the weight of the silence settle between us. You don't get it, Derek snapped, his voice rising. You're a liability. This isn't just about your clearance. It's about the bigger picture. You're obsolete. The company's moving in a new direction, and you don't fit anymore. That was the moment it clicked. It wasn't about the clearance. It wasn't about the company's needs. Derek wasn't trying to cut me out because I was a liability. He was trying to push me out because I was too good at my job, too competent. I knew too much. And Derek needed a team of people who'd do what they were told without question. He didn't want anyone who could challenge him. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. I'm not signing anything. You can take your severance package and your badge. I'm not going anywhere. Derek's jaw clenched. He was pissed now, his face reddening as the power struggle played out in front of us. You'll regret this, Mark. I didn't care. He could yell all he wanted. I wasn't backing down. Janice looked like she was about to say something, but I held up my hand, cutting her off. I'm done here. Derek, clearly frustrated, stood up, glaring at me. This isn't over. I didn't even respond. I just stood up, grabbed my things, and walked out. The next day I set up shop at home, knowing Derek and his crew would be making their move. I'd spent enough time working remotely to know I could keep an eye on things without anyone knowing. I logged into the legacy backend I'd built years ago, separate from the corporate access, and kept the feed open, watching for any sign of trouble. Sure enough, Derek's people were at it, making repeated sloppy attempts to access the classified vault. It was obvious they didn't know what they were doing. They were throwing darts in the dark, trying to guess their way in. I could see the familiar patterns, attempts to bypass security features I'd designed to be fail-safe. They'd never get in. I'd made sure of that. But the fact that they were trying meant Derek had pushed them into something they didn't understand. And that meant trouble. I checked the security cameras around the office next, secretly streaming them from my laptop. I had a legacy monitoring system tied to government compliance, one Derek never knew existed, that let me peek in on most of what was happening in the building. The feed buzzed to life, showing Derek's new hire, Ethan, sitting at my old desk. The kid had no clue what he was doing. I'd watched him fumble with cables and hardware before, and this was no different. He looked like a deer caught in headlights, pushing buttons and staring blankly at the screen, completely out of his depth. But what really caught my attention was Derek, standing over Ethan's shoulder, guiding him through things that were way beyond his abilities. The guy was clearly pushing Ethan into areas of the system that required experience, not some half-baked guesswork. I watched as Derek pointed at the screen, trying to act like he knew what he was talking about. But it was obvious. He was faking it, and Ethan was just following along. The phone rang mid-afternoon, interrupting my thoughts. It was security. They said there was a strange delay in accessing the main system. My gut dropped. I already knew what this was. Ethan had been trying to bypass one of my most critical security features. I could feel the tension in my chest. I didn't panic, though. I'd seen this kind of thing before. I pulled up the emergency backup logs from my USB drive and started scanning through them. The more I looked, the clearer it became. Ethan had made a huge mistake. He'd tried to overwrite a core system, one I'd designed specifically to protect against unauthorized access. And he'd failed, spectacularly. I couldn't help but smirk. The logs were a mess, full of desperate attempts and half-baked commands. Whoever thought they could just brute force their way through had no idea what they were dealing with. The security breach wasn't just a glitch. It was proof that they were scrambling, trying to cover their tracks without the slightest understanding of what they were doing. I knew what I had to do. I pulled out the same USB drive I'd used earlier and began mirroring the compromised logs from the server. I plugged it in and began mirroring all the compromised logs from the server. I was collecting my evidence, but I wasn't just covering my tracks. I was setting the stage. I wasn't going to sit back and let Derek make a mess of things. The more I copied, the clearer it became. Derek had made a fatal mistake. He'd tried to overwrite the core systems I'd built to self-protect in cases like this. And now, he was about to learn the hard way that I'd designed those systems to shut down completely if they were tampered with. That was the beauty of it. It wasn't just about securing data. It was about creating a failsafe that would shut the whole thing down if someone like Derek tried to mess with it. I sat back in my chair, the weight of what was happening sinking in. Derek was playing a dangerous game, but he didn't know the half of it. The next day I walked into the corporate meeting, trying to keep my face neutral. I had a feeling I knew what this was about, and I wasn't wrong. Derek was there, sitting with that smug look on his face, looking like he'd won already. I could almost smell the self-satisfaction coming off him. Beside him, the CEO, Mr. Hamilton, sat with a forced smile plastered on his face. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He hadn't been around the tech team enough to know what was really happening, but he was trusting Derek blindly. That was his first mistake. I stayed silent, not giving anything away. I had no reason to make a scene. Yet. Hamilton cleared his throat. "Mark, we've been looking at your role here, and we're hoping you can help with the transition." His words were slow, like he was testing them out. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I kept my expression deadpan. Transition. That was corporate speak for, "We're getting rid of you, but we want you to walk out quietly." They were trying to shove me out the door without making waves. Before I could respond, Derek slid a report across the table. "This is the security audit," he said, his voice smooth like he was doing me a favor. "It shows that your clearance was revoked due to an administrative lapse." I picked it up, not rushing, not giving Derek the satisfaction of looking at it too eagerly. I could tell the second I laid eyes on it. It was a joke. I skimmed it quickly, but I didn't need to read more than the first few lines. The whole thing was a fabrication, a cheap piece of paper meant to cover up Derek's mess. I put the paper down without saying anything. Derek was still going on about how I'd be better off signing the severance package, but I wasn't paying attention to him. Instead, my mind was already calculating the next steps. I could see the security feed in the corner of my eye, the same feed I'd set up to monitor the office remotely. Derek's new hire, Ethan, was back at it, trying again to access the vault. But this time, I could see him making changes to the core security systems. Sloppy, desperate changes. They had no idea what they were doing, and I could see that Derek didn't care about competence. He just needed people who would do his bidding, no matter how much damage they caused. I didn't need to look at the report anymore. I already knew what was going to happen. I stood up, cutting Derek off mid-sentence. "Excuse me for a second." I didn't wait for a response. I walked straight to my desk, my mind already 3 steps ahead. Derek was still talking behind me, trying to make his pitch, but I wasn't listening anymore. The moment I sat down, I plugged in the drive I'd stashed away. I could feel the weight of the moment, the quiet hum of the system, as I accessed the emergency override I'd built into the vault. I pulled up the screen, and I saw the flashing red warning. Unauthorized access detected. I knew exactly what it meant. Derek had pushed the wrong button. The system was locking down, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I typed in the manual override code, fingers moving steadily over the keyboard. As soon as I hit enter, I felt the rush of satisfaction. The system triggered the secure freeze, locking down all the data. Derek wasn't just locked out of the system. He was about to lose everything. Behind me, I could hear Derek yelling about his demo, about how everything was supposed to go smoothly. But it was too late. His world was crashing down around him, and he didn't even know it. The screen in front of me flashed one final warning. System lockdown initiated. Government protocol engaged. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence settle in the room. The system had just triggered the government's silent alarm. A flood of thoughts hit me at once. The feds would be on their way. Derek wouldn't be able to undo this. I knew the company's data wasn't just classified, it was tied to government contracts. If the feds got involved, there was no way Derek would get out of this. He'd pushed too far, tried to erase too much. I kept my eyes on the screen, waiting, letting the weight of what had just happened sink in. Derek was still talking, still trying to salvage his plan, but now his words were just noise. The next morning, I sat back in my chair at home, cup of coffee in hand, watching the whole damn thing unfold. I'd set up the cameras around the office again, keeping a close eye on everything. My fingers drummed on the side of my mug, and I couldn't help but feel a little smug as I sipped my coffee, knowing I was about to watch Derek and his crew crash and burn. Agent Miller walked in like she owned the place. I could tell the second she stepped through the door. She had that quiet, powerful presence, like she could make grown men freeze just by saying her name. Derek and Ethan were still fumbling with the terminal, trying to force their way back into the system like they had a clue. But Miller wasn't here to play. I listened as she asked for the logs. Derek stammered, trying to explain, but I could hear the desperation in his voice. He knew the game was up. He just didn't know how bad it was. Miller didn't give him the chance to keep talking. "You're under federal investigation," she said, her voice sharp and cold, "for mishandling classified data." I leaned back in my chair and smiled to myself. Derek tried to bluster his way out of it, but Miller wasn't having it. She wasn't buying the crap he was trying to sell. She had the facts, and there was no wriggling out of this one. Through the cameras, I watched as federal agents began seizing the company's files. The place felt like a ghost town, except for the chaos unfolding in front of me. I knew it was only a matter of time before they found the evidence I'd quietly gathered. The logs, the backups, everything I had stashed away was about to come to light. Then, as expected, Mr. Hamilton walked in. The CEO. He looked like a man who had just realized he was out of his depth. His forced smile wavered when he saw the agents moving in, but he still tried to salvage the situation, acting like he had any control left. Miller turned to Mark's old desk, my desk, and asked for the backup logs. I watched as she pointed to the spot where the backup drive I'd left behind was sitting. Hamilton didn't know it yet, but those backup logs were all I needed to make sure Derek was done. Derek's face went white when Miller turned to him, delivering the final blow. "The feds know everything, Derek. You've been caught in your own lies." I could practically hear the blood drain from Derek's face. The realization hit him hard. He'd thought he could cover his tracks. He hadn't even realized he was digging his own grave, bit by bit. From my spot at home, I leaned forward, phone in hand. I wasn't done yet. I had one last thing to do. I dialed Hamilton's number. It rang twice before he picked up, and I could hear the panic in his voice when he answered. "Mark," he said, like he was hoping for a miracle. "You've got bigger problems than I do," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Your defense contract is gone. You've lost everything. Derek's fraud is going to cost this company everything. You might want to think about what that means for your future." I hung up before he could respond. I didn't need to say more. He'd figure it out. I turned back to the monitors, watching as Derek's world crumbled around him. The agents were everywhere now, moving quickly, methodically, like they knew exactly what they were looking for. A few weeks later, I was sitting in my new office at the Department of Defense, the walls bare except for a few certifications and a clock that ticked louder than I liked. Agent Miller was standing in front of me, a satisfied smile on her face, as she talked about the successful audit. "You did good, Mark," she said, nodding. "The rogue operation is shut down, and the investigation into Derek and Ethan is ongoing. Their futures don't look too bright." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a sense of relief I hadn't expected. It felt good to finally be free of all the corporate nonsense, the middle managers, the politics, the endless red tape. I'd never fit into that world. I wasn't a yes man, and I sure as hell wasn't someone who would let someone like Derek take me down. Just then, my phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at the screen. It was Hamilton. I already knew what he wanted. He wanted me back. He'd probably been begging every day since the mess went down. I let the phone buzz again, but I didn't pick it up. Let him stew. He didn't deserve an answer. Miller noticed the phone, but didn't say anything. She'd seen how the system worked by now, the kind of man Hamilton was. "Mark," she said, changing the subject, "we'd like to offer you a direct hire contract here. No more corporate crap. No more middle managers or distractions. Just solid work, straight to the point." I let the offer hang in the air for a moment. I had to admit, it sounded damn good. A place where I could do what I was good at, where I could actually make a difference. But the truth was, I'd already made my peace with the way things had played out. I was done with that world, with people like Hamilton, people who only saw what they wanted to see. I looked up at Miller and smiled. "I'll take the offer. This is where I belong." She raised an eyebrow, clearly pleased. I knew you'd say that. I sat there for a few seconds, letting the gravity of it all sink in. I thought about Derek, about how his incompetence had cost the company everything. The contracts, the reputation. Hell, it even cost him his job. But more than that, it cost me my own job. At the time, I'd felt angry. Now, I felt like it was all part of the plan. Derek's mess had pushed me out, sure, but it had also opened the door to something better, something real. Miller continued, her voice softening just a little. The investigation is still ongoing, but trust me, Mark, they won't get away with it. The government doesn't forget about stuff like this. Derek and Ethan, their futures look bleak. I nodded, not needing to hear more. The writing was on the wall for those two. Derek might have thought he was smart, but he had no idea what he was dealing with when he crossed me. I was glad to know it was over for him. I stood up and shook Miller's hand. Thanks for everything. Glad to have you on the team, she said, giving me one last nod. I walked out of the Department of Defense offices, feeling like I'd taken back control of my life. The weight on my shoulders was finally gone. I'd done what I needed to do. I'd found my purpose. And Derek? Well, he was going to be remembered for all the wrong reasons. As I stepped into the sunlight, I realized the final bit of revenge wasn't in the fallout. It was in knowing that Derek would never again be able to destroy someone the way he'd tried to destroy me. He wouldn't get away with it, and that was enough.